Michael Udall and CavalierGuest. With your permission, I'd like to start the show with a brief explanation about the history between the two of you. Cav, of course, you were the coach of Michael Udall, and Michael, you were one of the players and later on the shot caller. So please, let's start from the beginning.
Do you want to start or should I?
I mean, we got some major beef.
Oh yeah, that is horrible. Actually, our first interaction, I don't know, Michael remembers it, but our first interaction was back when I was posting educational content on a regular basis. And it was shortly after I started the tank. He actually messaged me on Twitter, and he asked me, "Do you play for a team? Like, do you coach someone? Where are you getting this information?" And I was like, well, I look at pro replays and I think really hard about the game. He was like, that's really cool. And that was actually our first interaction, like long before I became his coach. And then when I started coaching him, a big emphasis for me was like how good he was at shot calling and trying to bring that skill to the fore and abuse it to the utmost degree to help the team. But it was interesting that he messaged me, and no one really knew who I was at the time, so it was really flattering. And that was my first interaction with Michael. That's how we met.
That's awesome. Yeah. So for me, that's why I don't remember that moment, but I'm happy that was like a really cool thing. And I just like when I see cool content, like cool videos and things that people create, like I try to like let them know that because I think stuff's awesome. So I mean, Cav, like I know you've been doing good content for a while, right? So that's something like I knew you were a streamer, and it was something where I don't remember who brought it up, but I think maybe GFE management brought up that like, hey, we've been talking to CavalierGuest about him maybe being a coach. And I was like, well, like I had positive things to say, or like I had seen his content. And I was like, well, he definitely seems like a smart guy. Like, let's see what happens. And you kind of came on and we like tried it out and it seemed to be working pretty well. I mean, that was a really hard team to coach, from my opinion. Like I think there were a lot of really, really strong personalities.
I would agree with that.
Which is a good and bad thing, right? Like there's pros and cons for that.
I mean, I think I learned a lot about coaching that team, more than I ever could have learned from coaching like an easier team. But I think as a result, my impact was lower because I didn't have that initial skill set. So it's good and bad. I learned a lot, but didn't have the impact I wanted to have.
Well, I would agree. I would say I feel like that was a really good learning experience for kind of everyone involved. I just think it was kind of a difficult situation all around. I mean, I enjoyed the experience. I don't know. I feel like I enjoyed having the experience of you as a coach. Like I've always wanted a strong coach figure, right? And
I loved it. It was like one of the best experiences I've ever had in Heroes of the Storm.
So when the two of you started to interact together initially, back then, was Michael a shot caller?
I kind of held tryouts to some degree for what each person was going to be doing in the league. But the day one of scrims, Michael shot calling was so much better than everyone else's. And it was obviously had so much more experience. And to me, shot calling wasn't just about making the right call, which he did like a good portion of the time regardless. It's also about there's a leadership quality to it where you sort of get people to buy in to what you're doing is the right thing. And he had that, and he made the right calls. So it ended up being like a one-sided race. Michael ended up being the shot caller. It wasn't really a contest.
Yeah, well, and that's something where like I've throughout my professional career, outside I'd probably say like the first 6 months, I've been like on and off. I'd say like the majority of the time I've been the shot caller from that team, right? Or one of the more vocal voices. There are a couple different ways and like styles of shot calling. I feel like for a very long time, I'd say for the first about year and a half. So that's winning Heroes of the Dorm for ASU, and then Team GFE when we first started and we were having a bunch of success with like Fury, Rafflecopter, Crowan, Akaface, and myself. I feel like I was a very micromanaging shot caller in the sense of like when you watch my stream sometimes and I'm telling everyone where to go, everyone what to do, that's how I was shot calling, right? So it was very much like this little puppet master of like telling everyone where to go. And granted, I'm not telling them like Q here and like they're making their own plays, but it's very much all the rotations were on one player. And then I think we made a roster swap, and then I was playing solo lane, and that was no longer possible, right? Because you can't really play solo lane and kind of do shot calling like that. So I moved into a role more of where I think Fan was in the 4-man, and he was calling that rotation, and I would kind of start taking over shot calling in the later game or like the later half. Kind of where I've gotten to now. Dansky and I kind of dual shot call on Endemic. And, it's interesting for me to like see my different like theories on shot calling evolve, because I feel like just my mentality as a player, I feel like I was so much of like, just put it all on me. Like I can do it all. Like, let's, let me just shot call into everyone what to do. And I feel like that led a lot to my burning out. Right. And where I retired, retired for like a month and a half, right? And I feel like a big portion of that is it's really hard when I was playing, so much responsibility was on me in the sense of like I was calling almost all the rotations, and one person cannot catch that for a long period of time. Like I can do it for certain games or for tournaments sometimes, but like let's say I don't show up to a tournament, right? The team kind of falls apart, not because we don't have good players, but just because the team has been conditioned to, you don't make plays, Michael tells you where to go, right? And that was kind of the thing, is like I was on a very talented roster with Fan, B-Kid, myself, Crowan, Akaface, right? 5 really, really strong players, and pretty much all of us in our prime, right? And we went to this tournament at PAX East, and I really, lack of a better term, shit the bed, right? Like I really, for whatever reason, I didn't show up mentally. Like my mentality was just off. The pressure got to me. And all 4 of those players are incredibly talented, right? You look at Crowan, he's the top team HHE. Fan, top team Tempo Storm, right? B-Kid, he's on Endemic. Like Akaface, like he was on one of the top teams for a really long time. 4 very talented players. They know how to play Heroes of the Storm. They're really good Heroes of the Storm players. Why could one of them not pick up the slack, right? It's because every single day in scrims they're being conditioned. This one player tells you what to do. And it's just like, I think that's a very unhealthy shot calling style. I feel like it happened a little bit with Fnatic in EU as well, where I feel like Quacknix was kind of that way. And they kind of ran into like similar issues. So, and it's also just like a lot of burnout and responsibility on one player, where it's just, it's a lot of stress. So that's how I used to shot call. I still can shot call like that. I just don't like to in competitive, but I do it in Hero League. Does that make sense? Sorry, that was a lot of information.
No, and that's good, because literally I think most amateur teams that are watching this, their shot caller is gonna sympathize with that, because that's how people start out shot calling. They're like, okay, I need you to do this, and they try to keep the entire plan in their mind, and they don't trust their team to some degree to do certain things.
Yeah.
And the big problem there is that teams don't always communicate what they're doing. So someone will go do something, but if they don't call it, then people don't know about it. It's a problem. So shot calling can be this top-down micromanagement style, but the most critical point you made there is you're going to miss things if you do that style of shot calling. There's going to be situations where a play could have been made and you didn't make it, or there's going to be situations where you got gone on and you don't counter engage correctly, because players aren't looking for their own things. They're only looking for what's being called.
Yeah, they're waiting. They're waiting to be told what to do, right?
And Mopsio and ADRD have both said very similar things about shot calling. Mopsio gives credit to ADRD for his shot calling structure. And he did an interview about it after Clash. And it's literally just, we try to make it so that everyone has their own responsibilities and it's never all on one person, so that everyone can play better. And I think that's a really big thing. It's interesting that you've now also sort of gone over to that school from your own experimentation with the split between Dansky and yourself on Endemic. So that's really cool. I'm happy to hear that, actually. And I imagine more fine details of that will come up as we go through some of the viewer questions. But that's shot calling in a nutshell. Is you want everyone to be on the same page, and how you get there can vary depending on level of play and level of players. And obviously in a Hero League environment, or in, one player is better than everyone else in your team, maybe you can micromanage. But if everyone's kind of on the same level, you want everyone to have an opportunity to share ideas and give input and make everyone shine, I think.
Yeah. Well, one thing I want to say about like styles, because there's different styles of shot calling. Every single team's shot calls differently. There is not one, this is how you do it, like the tried and true method. I look at a team like Heroes Hearth, I feel like they are very much, they all kind of give input. They're all like pretty even. You look at Cloud9 when they won BlizzCon, it was very much the same way. They didn't have a dominant shot caller, and their rival team was Tempo Storm with Dreadnought, who was a very like micromanaging shot caller, and they both were incredibly talented, incredibly strong teams, right? So it's kind of figuring out what style works for you. And like me, like the most successful times in my career is when I was an incredibly micromanager shot caller, right? So I can't sit here and say like that doesn't work, because it did. It did work, right. But it led to a lot of adverse things, right? So maybe if I navigated that better, we would be in a better place, right? And that's kind of figuring out like what works for you and trying to figure out how to wait to do it healthily. Does that make sense? Because like both styles of shot calling have pros and cons. So it's just figuring out what you want.
And there are a lot of different kinds of shot calling. We know that at the start of every game, Whoopi kind of outlines how he wants the game planned or played, because he understands the draft and how he drafted. And it's like, this is how we're going to play the entire map, 1 to 20. And then JPL actually handles a lot of the minutia of when do we rotate here, when do we do this, are we going on in this fight or not? Because he's there. And Liquid also has a distributed shot calling method, or did back in 2016, and they took a long time to work that out. They were really rough for a long time, a lot of inconsistencies in their play, and they got more consistent. So every team in the pro scene has sort of worked this out over time, with different members coming in and out and contributing different things. There's not a right and a wrong way to shot call. The evaluation I think everyone should have is, did it work or didn't it work, and how can we adjust our shot calling so it accomplishes what we want it to accomplish.
You guys kind of touched about the different styles of shot calling, and granted, I would like to further discuss it later on. And I think, you know, what we should start the discussion with is actually the very basics. Cav, you kind of touched at the very beginning, is what is shot calling essentially? What is shot calling the job? What is expected of a shot caller? You know, a lot of people, especially, you know, I'm coming from Heroes Lounge, and Heroes Lounge has a variety of skill levels. You have people from bronze all the way to top grandmasters on the EU ladder, and every one of them has a different understanding of the various roles that you have in the game, and shot calling is no exception. So maybe Cav, Michael, maybe you can tell us what, in your opinion, is shot calling. What is the job of the shot caller?
Michael, you want to take that one first?
Yeah, I mean, so I feel like if you're a sports person, I feel like the best analogy is someone like the quarterback, right? They're the one kind of calling the shots, because it's an ever-changing game, right? So you kind of have an outline, right? And I generally feel like the outline should be given by the drafter, right? It's like a pair of like the drafter and the shot caller are like, okay, this is what I drafted. This is what I had with, like, this was what my mentality with it. Okay, we have Nazebo. Our power spike is level 20. We're looking to turtle until then, right? That's you giving an outline, right? The shot caller is basically get us there, right? And that's very much like, okay, it's Tomb of the Spider Queen. We want a 4-man rotate mid top, and then we want to have a solo lane bottom. And then it's kind of like adapting is throughout the game, because every single game is different, right? You are constantly going to be having these different rotations, different things kind of happening with you, kind of happening throughout the game. And the shot caller is one that really adapts the plan to it to get to those power spikes, or to get to those, you know, moments where you can shine with your draft. So I'd say the shot caller is very much calling the shots, cliche, but it's like helping you step on the process of like, okay, we're about to hit 13. Just wait for that. Once we're 13, we'll look for an engage, right? And then at that point, the tank is the one who he's in charge of looking for the engage, instead of like the shot caller telling them where to go. So I think it's more just like outlining the plan as you go along, of like, okay, we should look to get gems and turn in, or like, we have an advantage here, we should look to push it. It's those kind of things of being like where you should go throughout the map versus telling everyone what to do. Does that make sense? Because like, I don't think telling everyone what to do is the role of a shot caller. It's more of like, this is what we should be looking for. This is our advantage. This is how we should push it.
You used a word there that I think should be emphasized more, actually, plan. So if everyone knows what is trying to be achieved, they should figure out the optimal way that they can do it personally. So like if you're going for a kill, or you're let's say you're getting for 20, you're not going to go aggressively on the enemy side of the map. You're gonna soak all your lanes, play safely, get to 20. Everyone should know how to optimize playing safely and soaking lanes. It doesn't need to be individually called for each member of the team. Sometimes, like if, you know, again, lower level player with a pairing with a low or a high level player, maybe you'll try to like help them out and coach them. But that's like coaching and teaching, not so much shot calling. I think a shot caller keeps everyone on plan. I think it's actually one of the best ways I've ever thought to put it, which is why conversations like this are so great. You're just trying to keep everyone on the same plan and understand what your comp's win condition is and stay to it.
Kind of to summarize it, and you, again, you mentioned it before with Wobby. So on the one side you have the strategy. You know, this is your plan. This is what you wanted to do in the game. On the other hand, on the other side, you have the way to achieve it, and the job of the shot caller is to achieve the final goal, the final strategy, right? Is this would be the correct way to describe it? To execute the strategy?
Yes.
I think that's fair.
You've mentioned that there is the style of shot calling, and I think we'll start with this, where you micromanage everything. Of course, we're not talking about the individual skills that the heroes have, but we are talking about pretty intense micromanaging. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit about this particular style of shot calling and talk about the pros and cons of it.
Yeah, so I mean, the super micromanaging shot calling is, like I said, the one that I've had the most success with in my career. So like you were alluding to, it's not me telling, okay, Murden, you stormbolt now. It's more of like, okay, you should be in this bush because there's going to be a rotation coming that way. Or, okay, we go into the game. It's like, I want Li Ming top, I want Haka bottom, I want these 3 heroes here. 10 seconds later, I'm like, okay, you go here to this bush. Okay, you go here to the siege camp. You go here to this thing. Okay, we're all going to the boss. Okay, you should look for stall this individual hero. And it's very much like telling everyone what they should be looking for at all points of the game. Right. So it'd be like, okay, so you should like to push out the lane and then rotate down, or like, okay, this is your like, and it's constantly giving all 5 heroes like updates on what they should be looking for, in the sense of like, this is what you should be looking for. This is what should be in your eyes, versus like, all right, we're 13. We should look for a team fight, you know, because like that's like very open of like, that's on everyone. Right. And it's much less one person telling everyone where to go. Does that make sense? So it's very much like one person constantly micromanaging where you go in lanes and like when to rotate. And it's like it's very point specific. So it's kind of hard because like a shot caller's job is to let you know that plan. But like when it's super micromanaging, it's basically like you're telling every bullet point of the plan like the entire time. And like you're winded at the end of a game because you've been talking for 20 minutes straight, right? And it's like constant little updates of like everyone knowing where to go at every single second.
I think a good way to put it is that kind of shot calling style. You're not only telling people what to do, like in terms of we want to invade this camp, because like a call could be we're going to invade the camp, we want to steal the camp, and everyone from that point onward understands, okay, we're fighting over the camp, and they can sort of optimize on their own. You're not just saying what we're doing, you're saying how we're doing it. You're saying why we're doing it in some cases. You're saying when we're doing it. You're doing out everything, and it's all on you. Every single W, the who, what, where, when, why, and how. It's all on you when you're micromanaging. Whereas less micromanaging shot styles, maybe you just say the what we're doing, and everyone else optimizes the how and the when, or maybe they call their own things that they're doing, and everyone sort of works together as a team. So both styles do, again, emphasize, both styles do work. It's just a question of how much of it is on the shot caller versus how much of it is on everyone else on the team.
We've spoken about the 2 main ways to shot call, one where you micromanage everything and the other one where you are a bit more trustworthy. But there are other types of shot calling. I would like to elaborate a little bit about this. This is the shot calling where pretty much everyone puts their input in it, right? Like he's in charge of this person in charge of that, right? And kind of everyone throws in their piece of information that they have. Maybe the two of you can talk a little bit about this. And again, pros and cons.
I mean, group decision making, and some teams do have really strict distributed roles. Like they'll have someone who really understands macro, and that's guy's the macro shot caller. ADRD is a good example of this. He makes a lot of macro calls. He's like, I'm freezing this lane, or we need to freeze this lane so they won't get 16, because if we let them soak this lane or push it out, they'll get the experience and they'll get 16 for the next objective. Like he knows that stuff consistently. He's very aware of it in his game sense. So you'll have macro shot callers. And then you'll have engaged shot callers. I think everyone to some degree has the tank be the target caller in fights, because it's easier for the tank to call who he's going on and CCing. And that's your major engage mechanic. And so that's like a little bit easier. But again, everyone kind of calls targets. Hansel's will call, they have arrow coming in from like over the wall, so it's guaranteed to hit from fog. And you do have that distributed sort of shot calling environment. But some teams do that on purpose. And then you have teams where everyone's just calling stuff all the time. And it's like you're always trying to find the best idea. That's how ballistics works now, from everything we've been told from the Korean scene. They don't have a single shot caller. Literally everyone on the team is talking. And you can see in their play where sometimes they pull off amazing things that I don't think one person could have called, where they have like flanks around walls. But sometimes they'll be like Li Ming's clearing a wave and Blaze jet propulsions onto someone and no damage is there to follow up because Li Ming was clearing the wave. That happened in their game this weekend. So every one of these styles has strengths and weaknesses, and it's just a matter of trying to work it out to, you know, achieve specific goals. And they all have their own pros and cons and their own drawbacks.
Group shot calling, I think, leads to more indecision.
Yeah.
Right? Where it's, can we boss? And then who answers that? You know what I'm saying? It's like 4 people, like 2 say, I think so. And then another one says no. And then it's like, well, now what? You know, like, so we're just going to stand here for like 2 seconds, which is huge in professional Heroes of the Storm game. So we're going to stand here for 2 seconds and like whittle around. And then we're going to start bossing. and we barely don't have enough damage because we took 2 seconds to figure it out, right? So I think indecision is a big thing, or like the example that Cab was giving of Lee Ming's clearing a wave and Blaze's jet propulsing. Why is Lee Ming clearing a wave when you have Blaze? You know, it's like that kind of a thing where you have this individual Lee Ming player who sees, okay, we need to clear this wave, which he probably was right to think. I'm bad at this. Where I'm like, that waves needs to be cleared. Okay, instead of being like, you go here, I'm just gonna clear it myself, right? You have Blaze. Blaze should always clear your waves, right? So it's like that's kind of the downfall sometimes of like you have a lot of different people, right? There's a lot of, you know, whenever people ask me about shot calling in my stream, I always say it's better to have 5 people do the wrong thing than 4 people do the right thing every single time without fail, right? Because if you have 5 people doing the wrong thing, you have a much better chance to succeed versus 4 people doing the right thing and 1 person kind of off doing their own thing, right? And that's kind of where that's a big advantage of having one micromanaging shot caller is you're generally all on the same page doing what this one person's plan is. But with like group calling, like you can have that as an issue, but I think the higher you get as a professional, it's more and more optimal because generally you're all kind of on the same page of this is what we should be doing, right? Because if everyone kind of knows the basic game plan, which is what was outlined at the beginning of the game, most people know how to get you there, right? And you'll just have slight disagreements, right? Or slight little hiccups and misplays. So it's not generally that bad, right? But just like it leads to more hesitation because versus one person just being like, this is what we're doing, it a lot of times becomes a little more of a discussion.
Do you have any recommendations for a process for resolving those disputes quickly? Like, is there some sort of veto power? Is that sort of maybe one of the roles of a shot caller? Is there the final decision maker and you just go with that if it's a split-second decision?
Yeah, you designate someone as a final decision maker. That helps a lot, I think. Even if it is group shot calling, that's okay because group shot calling I think is really good, especially in early game where there's a lot of little individual micro rotations. You need group shot calling for that. And then like late game things, it's like we just killed 3 heroes. You kind of set one person, they're kind of the veto power, right? We just killed 3 heroes. Can we core? Or like we're running towards the core. It's kind of on them to be like, we can do this or we can't do this, right? And that way everyone knows, okay, it's still kind of group calling. And if you see an opportunity, you should call it out. But this person, if they call us off, we're all backing out because they know what's right, right? That's something we as a team has bought into. We have decided that person, you know, like we are putting our faith in that person, right? And if they mess up and make the wrong call, it's not their fault because we all put our faith in them. Like that's just drawback. You know, sometimes you make good calls, sometimes you make bad calls. So
absolutely, and that's a good point. If your team is going to have a distributed shot calling methodology, they still need someone to have veto power just in case there's that disagreement. You don't want to have that split second of indecision. So you always have a process to make sure you're making reasonably fast calls, even in situations where people are maybe calling different things, then maybe there's some disagreement. And then you should follow the call because you don't know if it's a good call or not unless you do it. I think that's a big thing that people struggle with. You can't evaluate a call if you don't actually do the call. You have to like 100% wholeheartedly follow the call. And if it fails, you can go back in the replay and analyze why it failed, and you know, that'll help your shot caller improve. But if you're not actually following the call, your shot caller is not. Your whole team really isn't learning what they can get away with and pushing limits.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point to bring up. Because like, let's say you wait 5 seconds to do the call that he wanted to do. Well, it's a completely different game at that point, right? Like maybe his call would have worked if you all instantly did it. And that's something that I actually think helped me so much of learning how to be a shot caller is that when I first was a shot caller, everyone just listened, right? Because I was playing with a bunch of amateur collegiate players, like they just listened. So it was very easy to learn, right? Because there were less variables of like, okay, I know everyone like instantly followed when I said something. So maybe that's something to try that out. If you're trying out a new shot caller, maybe give them a month or give them 2 weeks where, okay, they're kind of in charge of everything and it's going to suck. And the person that has to do it, my heart goes out to you because it's going to be really hard and you're probably going to lose a lot of games, but you're going to learn a lot. And the whole point of scrimmaging and practicing is to learn. It's not to win. So I think that is like a very, like a good test that you could do. And it doesn't have to be like 2 weeks. You can do like 1 week. You can do a couple of days where basically this is our shot caller. Everyone, what he says, we listen to, right? And then right after we play that game and we get 4 level leaded, we're going to go into the replay and we're going to watch and we're going to see what calls were right and what calls were wrong. And your shot caller 2 weeks later is going to be a lot better because you learned a lot because everyone instantly listened. So,
yeah, and something I always like to say on stream is you actually do learn more from losing than from winning. So like push the limits in scrims, look for opportunities to be better at every point. And even if you're losing, you're still improving. Like scrims should be about improving, not about winning. If you're winning all your scrims, you're probably hitting a wall. Fnatic said they were winning in 90% of their scrims at one point last year, and immediately afterwards their performance in actual games started to degrade because they didn't feel like they were getting quality practice. So you need to make sure that you're still learning in scrims, and that's going to involve losing at least some of the time.
You kind of mentioned it, Michael. What are some of the struggles you've had as a shot caller in the past? And specifically, out of curiosity, you've said, sometimes people don't follow or take a bit too long to follow your call. Sometimes they take 5 seconds to listen to your call. What exactly do you do in those situations when it happens, especially in a live game?
That's a really aggravating situation as a shot caller. I'm one like, I don't know. It goes back to my theory on it's better that 5 people do the wrong thing than 4 people do the right thing, or 4 people do the right thing and 1 person does the wrong thing, right? It's really important to be on the same page. And the second that you have, I've had that situation in games where one player is just like, I'm going to do what I want, and we're going to, because I feel like I'm right, or for whatever reason, Michael's not calling well. So I'm just going to kind of try and take over, right? Which is okay. Like, let's say I'm having a bad game. It's just important to articulate that. So, I guess some of the biggest, I hate when people it just goes back to what we were talking about with Cav is like, how do you know a call is right unless you test it and you fail, right? So like, I really hate in scrims when it's like you call something and it's okay to be like, I think that's a bad idea, right? So like, I'm like, let's boss here. It's really risky. And my team's like, I think that's a bad idea. But if I'm like, do it, then we do it. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's okay to voice like a little bit of hesitation, but once I've made like the final call, you don't call it off, right? And that's kind of like, that's just how it has to be as a shot caller with every single team, is you need to have someone that has that power to be like, I don't care what you feel, we are doing it, right? Because like, you're going to have moments where 2 people feel differently about things. So, that's just a hard moment that with every single team, you kind of have to go through those avenues and figure out, it's hard. Yeah, I don't know. It's really, really hard when you have different people have different views on the game. And that's just part of it, is that everyone views the game differently and everyone has different approaches and wants to do different things, but all of our end goal is the same. We want to win, right? When we want to improve. So that's kind of, that's just a hard thing I've had on every team, where you have just difference of opinions, I guess.
Well, I think that's really important to remember. I actually have a really specific question for you, since you put it that way.
Yeah.
Dig, during one of their interviews for Western Clash, said that they felt like one of the gaps between NA and EU was actually that NA players didn't trust their teams as much, and EU players kind of always trusted their team and tried to bring up the team instead of showing off their own plays. And I think that ties into shot calling really well, because if an NA player maybe disagrees with shot caller, maybe they don't follow the call.
They just do what they want. Yeah.
They just do what they want, which doesn't seem to happen very often in EU. There's a lot more trust. And would you say that that's the biggest thing really about shot calling, is not just whether or not the call's good or not, it's about having the entire team trust the call.
Yeah, they have to trust and respect you. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, otherwise you get into this little spiral of, okay, well, they're not listening to me. What's even the point of shot calling? What's even the point in me making calls if when I make a call, they're just going to ignore it? Or when I make a call, which is equally unhealthy and bad of the shot caller, right? That is a fault. The shot caller should not let himself get into that spiral, right? That is like a logical jump, right? Where, okay, I make calls, this one person or these couple people or whatever reason, the team's not following what I say, right? So why am I even saying anything? Why am I like slaving over this, right? And that's something where it's like, when you're super micromanaging and your team's not listening to you, it's like, you feel like you're giving more effort, right? Because you're telling everyone what to do. And like, I think comparisons as a whole are incredibly unhealthy in a competitive environment, incredibly unhealthy.
And then you get silent calms and people get resentful, and
then you just get people
very
silent.
emotional
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
So, I do think that is something that happens in NA, though. I would agree, Cav, that I think it happens more in NA than it is in EU, where players' ego.
Well, and I know it happens in the EU amateur scene, and I know it happens less in the EU pro scene. So I think that's a big thing to think about when you're thinking about your own amateur teams. Make sure everyone's on the same page. Make sure you trust your team, but make sure people are feeling good about the call. Like, how people feel is going to affect their energy investment into a particular game. And some people from teams, like, they start losing and that person gives up. The GG at 4 minutes guy in Hero League exists in all of us. and people stop trying as hard, even if you're shot calling. Maybe they're not listening to the call because they think the game's already lost. So what's the point? And again, you always have to be trying your best because you're always trying not just to win this game, but practicing for the next game and the next game and the next. And that goes over to hero overall attitude, but attitude affects shot calling. Good shot callers will be like, are you off today? Do I need to put less pressure on you? In some cases, maybe we'll put you on an easier hero in a set, stuff like that.
It's interesting because I think that's a captain role, what you just said. I think that should be a captain's role, not a
That's
shot
true.
caller's role.
But maybe I'm conflating the two because you were the captain and the shot caller for GFE. But
Yeah, no, because I think I did both of those. I did do both of those
did.
roles. So it was
Yes.
like, in your
Absolutely.
mind, a shot caller and a captain are kind of the same thing.
But for a lot of amateur teams, the leader of the team is also the shot caller.
Yeah.
And that's a good point. Do you break those rules up? Do you have a morale officer, like someone who's in charge of that, and some other brainy guy is in charge of shot calling? And they are different. They can be different things. So shot calling is not necessarily just leadership. It's a good distinction to make.
Shot calling and hero league. Michael, do you think there's a difference between coordinated shot calling and something like hero league shot calling?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Okay. Woo!
Started with an easy one.
I don't know if you guys followed my journey last season when I got 30K
Oh, I
points.
absolutely did.
I am so proud of it. 67.5% win rate over like 540 games. That's insane. I am so proud of it, so I'm okay gloating about it. That is 100% hero league shot calling, right? And but look at my competitive season. I did not have a good season, right? So it's like they're incredibly different, and right, not necessarily. It's like I think a big thing about hero league is you basically go from having not a coordinated team to a coordinated team. So basically, you go from one team being coordinated and the other team not being coordinated. Versus professional is you have one team that's a little more coordinated than a coordinated team. Does that make sense? So just being on the same page is a huge benefit. So I think hero league shot calling, and it doesn't have to be super micromanaging. It's just calling out things that might feel basic to you of okay, it's 2 minutes on Curse Hollow. We should do our siege giants because the trip's going to spawn bottom and we want to push it during the fort. Something like that can be so big, right? Because then you fight for 2 minutes at the Curse because it's hero league and you have Gazelle with turrets and they have a Probrius and you get a whole top fort, which makes it so that you're 7-5 and you can completely snowball the game, right? So I think hero league shot calling is much more impactful. Where if you're trying to individually win and improve, I think shot calling, and it doesn't have to be these huge, crazy, let's rip boss type things. It can just be basic mercenary camps or just typing before the game and being hi, these are the lanes I think we should do. And most of the time your team's oh, that sounds nice. Someone's kind of taking direction. I think a big thing about shot calling that people really need to understand is it doesn't matter what you say, it matters how you say it. I think that is such a big thing that kind of gets lost in shot calling.
Okay.
Is, hey asshole, why are you top lane? You should be bot. Versus hey man, I think you're so cool. Can you please go bottom lane? Let me take over this lane for you, smiley face. Which one's gonna work better, right? And obviously extreme examples, but I think finding a way to articulate your things, and this is kind of hard, right? Because for my hero league experience is different than anyone else, right? I'm a known pro player, I'm a streamer, so people recognize me in GM, right? So they're gonna listen to me. So how do you distribute that to everyone, right? And I feel just saying things in a nice way, or kind of trying to start a dialogue, even in draft screen, it's hey, how's your day going? Or here's a funny joke I read online. People are just instantly more invested in that, and okay, this guy at least seems kind of nice. I know he might not be the best player ever, but at least he's kind of nice. Let's see what happens, right? Versus an approach of dude, this is a Smurf. My main's a diamond, and you're in silver, and listen to me, and people's reaction is kind of well, that guy's kind of an asshole. I don't want to listen to him. So I guess just trying to find a nice way to start off your shot calling experience. Does that make sense? What do you think, Cav? It's kind of a hard one because.
No, actually, the last point, we talked about a little bit earlier how it can also be a leadership thing. And I think in hero league that applies even more than in competitive, because in competitive, everyone's already bought in and they're we're going to follow the call. Fine. And I think one of the best things you can do in hero league is actually make a simple call that's 100% safe early. And then people are oh yeah, that worked. Okay, I guess I'll listen to this guy because his call worked.
Yeah.
And you can get to more and more insane calls as the game goes along if that's your thing, because people are going to follow follow you and be like, yeah, I agree, that's gonna work. And people will follow. People will straight up stop caring about a game if they don't want you to win. They don't care. A lot of people have a point where they're like, I don't want that guy to win, so I'm not going to try anymore.
Yeah.
Even if you're not shot calling, even if they just like disagree with your pick, people have a different point where that happens for them, but everyone has it. So being nice and being friendly and making people like you helps you carry games because they then want to win not just for themselves but for you. And that's the leadership aspect coming into Hero League far more than it does in competitive, and that's one of Michael's strengths, which is why that 30k run was actually so impressive if you watched the stream of it.
Cav, your strategy kind of reminds me of Deck Arcane, where you just throw potion and lead people to where you want to be thrown.
That's a mechanical version of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
To a psychological.
You're safe, and they just follow you. So we kind of started talking about, and hopefully you can elaborate a bit more about the type of shot calling you specifically did in your climb in Hero League, where you got the 30k points.
Yes, I mean, it's super micromanaging. So in my climb to 30k, I feel like it's interesting because I've kind of reflected back, right? So I haven't really gone that hard this season, right? Like I think I'm top 10 now, but I really haven't been trying as hard as I did last season. And I was wondering of like, so why did last season work, right? Because when I was getting up to, I was 28k points, I was getting like 150 a win and I was losing 250 a loss, right? So I had to be at this like insane, I had to win 2 to basically get 50 points, right? So every 2 wins to 1 loss, like I had that. So I had to keep above like a 70% win rate. And I was thinking like, how is that possible? Like, how did I do that? And I think a big part of it is I think the community, like people in GM knew that I was going to shot call, and they knew that if I was on their team, they had this hope. Does that make sense? It's like, okay, this man's going to like kind of rally us and like tell us what to do. And I very much was very micromanaging. I was not group shot calling. It was join voice comms, listen to daddy, and I will lead us to victory. That's very much like how I approached it. But I think people enjoyed that because like they won and we had fun and I cracked jokes, and they were kind of along this little journey. Right. So I feel like that was a part of it, right? Because I was very micromanaging shot caller, right? And I am a good micromanager shot caller. I've showed that in professional scene, right? But I also feel like part of it was you'd see that Michael Udall was on your team and you'd be like more excited and like you just had a little bit more hope of like, okay, we're gonna win this game. Right? Like the last 3 times I played with him, we won, and the last 2 times I played versus him, we got crushed. Right. So I think like that kind of mentality of like people would see they were playing against me. And the reason I have this thought, by the way, is not just like me inflating my own ego. It was just like I was talking to other GM players and they were like, yeah, last season it sucked. Like I'd see I was playing against you and I would, our team would be demoralized already. Like, oh, they're going to do like shot calling. Like that guy's a shot caller. Like we're not going to be as coordinated. Right. So I feel like it wasn't all my shot calling. I feel like it also was a little bit psychological in the sense of like my team had more hope and the enemy team had like less hope. Does that make sense?
That makes absolute sense. And it falls into the idea of creating a narrative when you're shot calling, because you think of a strategy, you're essentially telling a story about how you want the game to go.
Yeah.
Right. And right at the beginning of the game, the narrative is already, we're going to win because he's
yeah.
Just listen to him and we'll win. Like that's a pretty easy narrative to step into if you can pre-create it. Obviously, you did a lot of work to pre-create it with the initial climb and the initial shot calling, but as you got better, like people bought into it more and it became easier for you personally. That's really cool. That was still one of the best things that's ever happened in Heroes of the Storm, not gonna lie.
Thanks, I appreciate it. It was insane. I still can't believe it happened. I worked so hard. I streamed so much, and like I was so try hard.
You really were.
I still feel like I'm recovering from like how try hard in Hero League I was for like a month and a half. Like, because you need to picture this. Like I was scrimming for 6 or 7 hours every day and then doing that, right? So it's like this is a 12-hour ordeal every single day where I'm maximum try hard. And
but worth it.
Learn. Yeah, worth it. I loved it. I'm so happy I had that journey.
So shot calling in professional scene, and not necessarily in AGC. We're talking about up in Division 2 and
just in coordinated play.
Yeah,
where like
play would be the better term. So it kind of talks to the people in Heroes Lounge too. What do you think are the most important things to focus on when learning to be shot caller? It kind of takes us back to the basics, but Maybe you can elaborate a little bit about the important parts of shot calling and maybe share a bit from your experience.
I mean, it's kind of hard because the biggest thing about shot calling is you're gonna have to really repetitively do it to learn. So I guess my biggest point of advice would say don't lose hope and faith. You're not going to be a good shot caller day one. You're not going to be a good shot caller month one, right? It's something that takes time and effort, and like you're going to have to improve. I do think a couple things you can really focus on that will help you is during draft and leading into the loading screen, talking about what you want to do. And this can be an open discussion. This doesn't have to be shot caller talking to everyone. This can be, hey guys, this is what I'm thinking for lanes. What do you think? Right? Like this is what I'm thinking of when we're the strongest, right? I think we're really good once we get ults. We should probably play passive until then, right? So kind of outlining that plan and kind of being like, so what do you guys think? Leading into that, because you generally have like a minute and a half of like time where you can discuss what you want to do leading up to that. And I think that'll really help you with a shot caller, because then you just remember the plan, right? We'll use the Nazebo example I used before is we have Nazebo, we need to hit level 20, we turtle. Okay, because it's this question of you keep asking yourself why, right? So why do we want to turtle? We have Nazebo. Why do we want to turtle with Nazebo? Because his level 20 is OP. Okay, how do we turtle? So it like helps you break down all these questions instead of like this huge broad, what do we do? Tell us what to do, you know? So it's like ask yourself what's your win condition, and then how will you achieve that win condition, right? So yeah, I would say that's your biggest question you should be asking yourself every single time is what's my win condition? How do I achieve that win condition? And if you don't know the answer, ask your teammates. You don't have to know every answer. And if you don't know something 100% and you feel 60% of like, I think this is my win condition, act like you know it 100% and try super hard to follow that win condition, because at the end of the game, you'll know whether or like that, yes, that was your condition, or no, that wasn't your condition. Does that make sense? Of like,
yeah,
go with your gut.
And sometimes you can just be Alex and have a varying comp that your team's feeding on Towers of Doom, and then you can just yell at them to stop feeding and then win the game. That actually happened for anyone who doesn't know last season. They had a varying comp and they were just brawling 3-4 while Alex was soaking, and he was like, guys, just stop feeding and we'll be fine. And they stopped feeding and they won. That's a kind of shot calling. But yeah, understanding your win condition and trying to keep everyone on it is a big thing. Right. Not feeding is a number one win condition.
That's how you win.
Might be a bit tricky in EU.
Yeah.
You know, Kev, from the stories.
That's he's not making that up. Yeah. Not feeding is not an EU special.
Michael, what and Cav, actually the two of you, especially Cav, from your point of view as a coach, what makes a good shot caller good? Like maybe and maybe more specifically, in the context of teams, what's the difference between a shot caller for a low tier team to one of the top tier teams?
From my perspective, a good shot caller has good listening skills and has good communication skills. So he can articulate exactly what he wants from people, and he can articulate the kind of information he needs, like when they've used abilities, what they're doing on the map. How is the top lane matchup going? Are you winning it? Are you going to have the rotational advantage? Can you come down? When can you come down? Is Burrow up? Can you get out of vision? Like, really good shot callers account for the capabilities of everyone on their team, both as individual players and on the heroes they're on, and try to form the plan around that. And they're very articulate so that everyone is on the same page. Micromanaging shot calling is like a good way to do that consistently, because everyone has to be on the same page. And then group shot calling can be, but I think really good shot callers just keep everyone on the coordinated in everything they're doing, even if it's across the map. If you're pushing aggressively with your 4-man and you have a lane that like is very gankable, but you can win it if you don't get ganked, then your off laner should also be pushing really aggressively, because that's putting pressure on two sides of the map. That's something literally across the map that should be happening at the same time together. And if that's not communicated, and your offlaner's playing passively, it's easier for people to rotate and defend the successful push that's happening. And there's no pressure elsewhere. You're not gaining other advantages. So I think good shot callers, the biggest difference between visibly between top teams and bottom teams is that teams are always on the same page when they have a really good shot caller, and teams are somewhat scattered when they have someone who's not as good at communicating.
I think that was a very good way to put it. I mean, I would also say creativity, I think, is a big one
Ooh,
of
that's a
like
good
coming
one.
up with creative. I mean, but that's just for high level. Like we're talking top pro teams, right? That's where, you know, like you have to come up with something creative and like figure out new ways to rotate and do stuff like that. But I think everything that Cad said is definitely, I would say, more applicable and something you need to get down first before you can get to that creative point where you're, you know, coming up with, let's try this crazy thing, and you know, who knows, maybe it works.
So let me kind of elaborate a little bit more about what Cav mentioned with the different ways to communicate your message to your team. Maybe you can give us examples of, you know, how you do it correctly versus how you're not doing it correctly.
I mean, I think the biggest thing is you just, as a team, you're going to need to figure out vocabulary and words and verbiage and talk about it beforehand, right? Because let's say it's level 16 to 14. My team's up. We're level 16. We're pushing Dragonshire bottom. And I say, team, let's push, right? What does that mean? That's broad, right? Are we going for the keep? Are we like just getting the wall? What's happening, right? Versus like, let's slow siege, right? Slow sieging and push are two different calls and they're two different things. And that's something that I think as a team, you should be having that discussion beforehand of, okay, what does slow siege means? Okay, that means we're trying to keep our mercs alive. That means we're trying to get the wall. We're looking for picks. Push, in my mind, being balls to the wall. Let's just run at that wall, right? Like I'm a Deckard Cain. I'm smacking the wall because he said push. And the reason he said push is because he saw 4 heroes top. You know, so it's like, different verbiage means different things, and that's for every single team. Every team has different verbiage, so kind of clarifying that verbiage I think is important, like talking about like stalling versus poking, because they sound like the same thing but they have like different connotations in each different team. So I think that's a big thing that can help you out, and I think people don't actually do that enough of like, let's watch a replay, let's watch the specific situation, and let's label it as something. Okay, this is slow sieging, and now when you say slow sieging, we will all remember this replay and we will go, okay, I remember what we talked about. That's what I'm going to do. Right. And that's something I think a good shot caller is good at explaining and articulating in replays and then putting words and basically connotations to it in people's brains so that in game you can like call that out.
For the EU viewers, push means run it down.
Push means run it down. So when someone says push bottom, you gotta, it really does.
Yeah,
it does me.
really
I'm not
does.
even kidding. It really does me.
Well, something Dreads talked about, right? He when he was shot calling, he tried to like football style of mentality about it, where he had words for plays that he wanted people to back in the day, and he's kind of encouraged teams to maybe try that out a couple times during like some of the HGC interviews. Like maybe you could have like a football play manual. But yeah, just there's not that many unique situations. There are some, and you can get into some crazy ones, but there's not that many unique situations that happen every game after game after game in Storm. So vocabulary, that's actually huge, and it's such a good thing. To have shorthand so the communication can be more efficient. Everyone is still understanding what's being said. That's actually huge.
Yeah, because a big example is like, it's really hard to explain things in game, right? So like, we'll use the example of slow siege. I can say, all right, we're looking to step up to this wall and we're looking to like slowly hit the structures, like just poke your spells, like we're looking for picks. That took me 5 seconds, right? Well, I'm supposed to be micromanaging my hero versus me just saying, okay, slow siege this wall, right? It's like, you can compact a lot of information beforehand and it just saves your life as a shot caller.
So a lot of these educational lounge shows, we always talk about prep. The game's won or lost before you even get into the game based on how good your prep is, like your draft prep, your practice. This is one of those things that you also have to work on, is making sure everyone has a vocabulary so communication can be short and efficient when you're doing calls. So we gathered a bunch of questions from viewers, and some of these are really good. I think you'll actually like some of these questions, Michael.
Are they designed for me or just for all of us? Or
they're designed for the shot calling episode, but
okay,
we'll let you take first crack at all of them, especially if one of them is your favorite.
I don't have to, but I can. Okay, makes me feel like there's going to be one that's specifically. All right, let's go. Let's do it. I'm ready.
All right. So questions from viewers. I'll start with those from Here's Lounge. Cav, you can do later the Nexus Schoolhouse. So okay. I have a question from Dark Wanderer. What's the best and most helpful calls to say to your team?
Nice try. No, I'm dead serious.
I think
nice try after something goes wrong, I think is really important. And that, I guess, would maybe play into a captain's role. But when I was first a competitive player, I was on this team, and every single time someone missed a skill shot or anything went wrong, it was dead silent. Dead silent.
And I was like, I hate it because everyone feels like they're on pins and needles. And then you're like in your head of like, I don't want to miss. And something as simple as just like, Beacon does it all the time. He'll miss his little stormboard. Everyone's like, nice try, nice try, nice try. And it's kind of like this little funny thing, but everyone's like happy about it. And like, it's just like good vibes. So I think nice try is a good thing that you can say of like, nice try. You know, I like that one person. That's my answer.
I like it. Actually, like your
Thanks.
answer.
I love that answer.
Yeah.
I had no idea how you were going to answer that question. But I like that answer a lot.
Next question coming from Classic from Team FMF. Hi, I'm a shot caller in my team, and I'm running often into situation that I'm feeling my team has weaker team fighting than our opponent. So the question is, how to shot call against a mechanically stronger opponent on maps like BOE, where you can't just skip the objective. I tend to call defensive then until I see an opportunity for a comeback, but sometimes there is none. Ideas?
I think, I mean, that 100% happens where you'll have a more mechanically gifted team that you're playing against. I actually feel like when I was first on GFE, we were really good at doing this, where draft yourself globals and put your opponent into situations where you get a 4v5, right? So the way you do that on BOE is you'd have Dahaka top, false side bottom, and they both push their wave, assuming the opponent's 5 manning, and either they're going to choose to give up 2 lanes of soak, or they're going to, catch the soak, and when they do that, you double global in and take your 5v4. I think globals are a good way. And there are lots of globals, something like Viking, ABBA. There's globals are one of the best ways to play against teams that are better than you, mechanically, right? Because they might not be better than you from a macro standpoint, where you can manipulate the map. Where I don't care if you're better mechanically, we have an extra hero, we win. Assuming I hope your team's not that bad mechanically where you lose 4v5s, because if that's the case, it's rough, right? But try and put yourself in situations where you get these 4v5s, or maybe drafting heroes like we used to do this a lot with like Illidan Abathur, picking a hero like Greymane, Monk, Anubrak, and just running into walls, right? Of just playing Fog and just running into walls. Like let's say BOE, you run a 1-3-1, right? So you have like a Dahaka and like a Junkrat or 2 solo laners, and you just have an Anubrak and a Greymane and a Monk just playing Fog, right? So what you're gonna do is every single time they show in a lane, you're running to the opposite lane, and you're gonna run into that wall and you're gonna trade structures. And what's gonna happen is you're gonna end up trading both forts, most likely. And you just run them around and you never really give them a team fight engage. And the reason you're able to do that is because you have so much pushing power that they have to respond to you, right? And then the way you play late game team fights is you just cocoon one hero and 7 side and just try and blow up a tank. And if you don't instantly kill the tank, you all run. It's like a guerrilla warfare type tactic. So I'd say try something like that, because that's actually those style of compositions are the one I had a lot of success with when I first was a part of GFE. So I think it's a really good way to play in amateur levels. I don't think it's as good in pro, but I think it's really, really good in amateur levels. So definitely try that out.
Next question coming from Buster asking, is your shot caller always your tank, or what position normally? That is actually something we haven't spoken about, and I'm curious.
I think it depends more on the player.
Yeah.
In an ideal world, I think a tank would probably be ideal, just because it's easier for them to force the engages when they want to. But I've been a support as a shot caller. I've been an off roller as a shot caller. I've been an assassin as a shot caller. I know different teams that have tanks, that have assassins, that have supports. It really I think shot caller, it's more important of the individual versus the role.
And there's been a lot of theory crafting on what the ideal thing is, and a lot of people are like, it should be the person who's always with the team, so like it should be the support or the tank. Support's really aware of cooldowns and where people are, because they have to be for their mechanics anyway. But then, as Michael said, if your shot caller is your tank, you're always really clear on your engages. There is a risk that your tank can get too far ahead. That's something that regularly happens to some teams that have a tank shot caller. They don't wait for their team to be in range, and they go in a little bit soon. I would say the hardest role to shot call from is the off lane, personally, just because you're not with your team, so everything becomes harder. But then Dig has Wubby, and that obviously works because they're the top team in the EU. So it's really more about the player. The person who's best at shot calling on your team should be the shot caller, regardless of role, I think.
Mikaku, I hope I pronounced it correctly. Question, what should you do when people are doubting the call you did will be the right and the team is unsure if they want to follow it? We did talk about it at length, but a quick answer, I guess.
First thing you should do is talk about it after the game. Discussing it in game is not going to do anything except make you lose. So I think tabling conversations is a healthy skill to learn, of like, all right, we'll talk about it after the game. We'll watch it in replay. Something as simple as that is really healthy and important, right? And you shouldn't do that for all things, because you do need to talk about like how you want to team fight, like specific shot calling moments, table it to after the game. And then in the replay, you as a team should be able to figure out what you think is the best call, right? And if your team loses faith in a shot caller, you need a new shot caller. You need to fix that trust and respect gap, because if you have this gap where no one trusts the shot callers or the calls, it's a very unhealthy zone. It doesn't matter if you're the best shot caller in the world. If your team doesn't trust you, you are a terrible shot caller. That's just the honest truth, because you have to have your team's faith. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. So
absolutely. And I actually have a specific thing that is a distinction. You can be like losing a fight because you got outbuttoned, but mid game, if the enemy pulls a combo that like you didn't think about, and I'm actually going to use a GFE example here. We hadn't scrimmed much Hanzo at one point, and we got Diablo APOC or Hanzo aired into Diablo APOC. And after the fight, everyone was like, "Oh, so that's a combo. Okay, we got to play around that by staying spread."
Yeah, we got to spread out because we just got destroyed.
And it's like you could adjust to the game, and it can be bad because you didn't expect the enemy team to be able to do something, and then you can adjust like for the rest of the game around that. But if it's more general than that, it's something that has to be postponed to after the game. You can discuss problems you're having mid-game against a specific composition and fix those. But if it's a larger issue or a more general issue, it has to wait till after the game. You're not going to solve it mid-game.
Yeah. Oh, and also like, just to be super clear, like the examples that I was talking about that you should always table are like, wow, we shouldn't have bossed there, right? Because you just got 5-man wiped. Like, wow, we shouldn't have bossed there. Like, we shouldn't have done this. We shouldn't have done that. Because you don't know. You don't know what you should have done until you watch the replay and you have full vision and you can like kind of decide, right? So like those kind of discussions, I think it's almost always bad to like blame and look back, because what that does is like tilt people, make people annoyed, and people aren't focused because you're focusing on the past moment, which doesn't actually matter at all in the current moment in the game. So like those type of moments, I think are just, you shouldn't do. So,
and that's something that will help you in Hero League even. Like you should
always
focus forward. What do we do to win from here? It doesn't matter what happened before. This is the position we're in. How do we get from here to winning?
Yeah.
Next question. Noznare. It's one of our mods in Heroes Lounge. What are some calls that you can make as a shot caller when you fall behind on a snowbally map, something like Tomb or Sky, to try and get your team back into the game?
Those ones are hard. So like you get to these points in shot callers where you have to make risky plays. Like you have to be like, soaking the lanes is not going to win the game for you, right? So that's a hard thing. I think ripping bosses when they won't expect it is a good way to get back into the game. Being in really weird bushes is a good way to get back into the game. So Tomb the Spider Queen, like let's say you're level 13, they're level 16, and they peel off to do their knights, invade that shit, right? If you're like down a keep and you're down really far, the only way you get back in the game is you've caught them like unaware, where basically they're like being too greedy, right? Where they're soaking 2 lanes and doing knights at the same time. That's the only way you're winning the game. And even if it doesn't go right, that is still the right call to make. Does that make sense? So I think you need to be really aggressive when you get really far behind on these snowballing maps. Granted, that shouldn't be like 10 minutes into the game, you're like doing all these crazy invades and stuff. Like that's what really, really, really dire situations. Like you have to make a very risky and bold call, because that's the only way you're getting back in the game. So those situations it's hard because I can't give you specifics, but I guess like late game, look for like boss plays and bushes where your team will not expect it, because no one in their right mind would 4 levels down start a boss, you know?
Cav, we in our first episode of this show, we talked about experience, and we came to the conclusion that when you're far enough behind, soaking experience doesn't make sense, and a risky call needs to be made. So I'm kind of glad you mentioned specifically that soaking isn't going to take you anywhere.
The rule of thumb that I've found consistent in competitive is if you are 3 or more levels down, you have to run at the enemy team. If you're 2 levels down, you're always going to have an even talent to your fight at some point. If you're just soaking, it might not be a great one, but it's going to happen. But if you're 3 or more levels down, you got to run at the enemy team.
Wait, but don't run at the enemy team like through lane. Don't let them see you. That's a big thing that people don't understand. Is like, we're 3 levels down, we have to run at them, and then like your tank just runs through the entire lane and gets one shot. No, you go from a flank. You go from this crazy angle where they're like, "What the hell is he doing right next to me?" You know what I'm saying? Like, what is he doing in that bush next to my knights when we have all our forts up? You know, like something like that where it's like, why would he ever be here? Like that's what you need to be going for.
We may have to do an educational lounge episode on vision control.
Yeah, probably.
Because that's a huge thing that does not often get talked about. Yeah, but letting them know you're running at them, not a good idea. Run at them, but don't let them know you're running at them.
Yeah. Next question, coming from Dentro from Sloth Sanctuary. What sort of information do you want to receive from your team during the game? Cooldowns are, for example, what else? That's a pretty good question. What kind of information are you looking for as a shot caller?
I mean, you want to know where the enemy heroes are, what the enemy cooldowns are down, right? So not just your cooldowns. I think opponents' cooldowns is a really big one. I'll just go through roles. Like off lane, I think the off lane is generally a little bit on an island, and I think they should dictate their own pace, right? Because it's really hard to like know what's happening in the off lane because it's like such as like minute like back and forth like joust of like pushing out the lanes and stuff like that. So like having your off laner be like, I have a wave advantage, like I have clear advantage on top lane. What should I do? You're like, rotate bottom and we can rip a mercenary camp, or like come look for a gank, or better yet, I think they should just tell you what they're gonna do of like, I'm double soaking, or I'm gonna look for a gank, or like I have rotation. Those kind of things are really good from the offlaner. Or this person's overextending, someone should come gank him. You know, like those are all good things. I think a tank, they should be telling you cooldowns. They should be telling you like fog and vision of like where they think you are, because they should be anchoring a lot of the times, right? So they should be being in bushes and like, hey, the opponents are over here. We can look for a kill, or like they should be the ones calling the engage of, okay, we have 16 talent tier advantage. Look for a fight. The tank, it's now on their hands and their shoulders to actually find that fight. Support, they should just be calling their cooldowns, like letting everyone know if they're safe, if they're healthy. Yeah, I mean, those are kind of the things, like letting your like people know when to go to lanes. I also think a really good thing that you can do as a teammate is constantly be checking camps. That's a huge thing that'll take like stress off your shot caller shoulder of like, oh, I'm not really doing anything right now. I'm gonna go see what time our boss is up and their boss is up. Our boss is up in 1 minute, their boss is up in 1:30. Like that way your shot caller doesn't have to look at those or like maybe miss those. Yeah.
One of the things that I like to tell teams is that if an ability gets used on them by the enemy team, it should be called. So if you're in lane with like a Jaina and Jaina is their main kill pressure and she clears the wave, you should be like, Blizzard got used. Blizzard was used on the wave, or Blizzard down, because it means that you can engage on them at the point, and there's no real risk of you dying because their main burst ability is down. But if the Garrosh throws you, like you want to tell people you're thrown anyway, because you might be dead if you don't tell them. But you know, use throw, taunt was used. Dragon's Arrow was used. Like, so call cooldowns that are used on you, because you're the person most likely to have seen that the ability was used if it got used on you. And I think that's a good way of breaking up responsibilities a little bit, and it helps people keep track of fights, because fights can be chaotic.
Next question, Diddy Squad from Suplex Esports. How important are pings in communication at higher levels? How often are they used?
That's a really good question.
Probably not often enough. I think it depends on the team. You know, I think my team's not very good at utilizing pings or articulating pings in a well like manner, because I think something that I can only speak on my team. I think we used to be like, look here, where the hell's here? You know, like I think that's something where it's like, look at my ping is a much better call, and then you ping somewhere, or like Murden's at my ping. You know, I think that's a very good way to use pings. Like I know I'll ping mercenary camps and like things like that, and I'll ping occasionally, like but I think that's definitely something that I could utilize more in pro play, and I think pro play as a whole could probably utilize more. I remember I heard like this crazy thing of like there was a pro Dota team that only communicated via pings, right? And I think Dota had pings that like allowed you to provide more information. They were a pro team that pretty much only used pings, and I was like, that's insane. And granted, it's a different game because Dota's a lot more about like farming and stuff like that. But I was like, wow, like imagine you could have a team, a professional team that like cohesively works at a high level just via pings, right? You don't need voice. Like that would be a very cool exercise to do, to like try and practice that. But I think pings should be used more.
I'm gonna circle back to an earlier point we made about communication and how condensing matters. There's only 4 pings in here as the storm, and you should communicate what you mean with a ping. So if you're like pinging danger, you're basically saying probably the tank's there, something like that, or you saw someone there, you saw the rotation. And if you're on your way, like if you're actually on your way, maybe you're not on your way, maybe you like want someone to go there, and that's what you're pinging. But I actually watch an enormous number of pro replays from HGC, download them from Master League, and watch them, and pings show up in replays. So there's actually a huge variance in the amount that teams ping. Genji and Dig both actually ping like a fair amount. Leftovers has started to ping more ever since Mobster got added to the roster. So it does vary a lot by team, but I have noticed a little bit of a correlation between top teams and pinging more. But I think they're from the looks of the replays, it looks like they're being used for specific things every single time, and not necessarily like what the ping is saying.
Yeah.
All right. Next question. Ruini is also one of our mods, the senior mod from Heroes Lounge.
Zarya God.
He's a Zarya main indeed. Asking, how do you deal with split focus of your shot caller, where the shot caller needs to focus on both calling the correct thing and playing the game?
Get better.
I don't know. That's a hard one. Every shot caller is going to play like worse than if they weren't shot calling. It's just, it's kind of a...
There's no exception to that. Everyone plays worse when they're shot calling. Quacknix, like if you watch Quacknix stream, he plays so much better in Hero League than he does in HGC. And it's so weird to say that. Yeah, pro player's playing better in Hero League than he does in a game that actually matters, but it's clearly because he's shot calling.
Yeah.
And
like maybe try playing StarCraft or doing something, because it all just comes down to like being good at checking the mini map. Answer for that, it's hard. I think there are definitely ways to try and improve that. I think a big one is like having your team kind of step up and do more, right? Because if you're needing to micromanage every single person, of course you're going to lose your character and be focused on different things. So maybe like have your team talk more and do more things. That might be a solution that could help. But yeah, you're definitely going to, your mechanical play is going to take a dip. That's just the nature of the job.
Okay. A brutal and honest answer. Thank you.
I mean, most answers that can be boiled down to get good are, this is hard, you need to work at it if you want to get better. And that's just the way it is.
Next question. Wipecraft from Yaoi Patrol. Our shot caller is a bit of a long one. Our shot caller, main tank, thinks he gets overwhelmed at times with keeping track of everything. Information other people give him, give about cooldowns, enemy, etc. Shot calling fights and macro, and having to perform his main tank duty as well. We're toying around with the idea of having 2 shot callers to split the duties. How can we do this effectively? What would be the best way to split tasks? So kind of a build-up question on Ruini's.
I think splitting things into having a macro shot caller, which is basically telling who where to go in sense of like, who's doing our mercenary camps? When should we do bosses? Like, should we give this trib? That should be one person. I think the other person should just, their sole responsibility be looking for proper team fights and proper engages and playing around your win condition of like when you're the most powerful in your power spikes. I think that would be a good way to split it up. I know that's something that a lot of teams do, right? Make your main tank basically in charge of calling engages and make your other person in charge of macro. All right. And that's something that I've done with a lot of teams where like I am the macro person that tells us when to do lanes, when to do mercs. But like I'll still have tanks that'll be like, no, come here right now. This is going to be a perfect team fight. We go there, we wipe them, right? Something like that of like having this balance, I think will really help you. So having one person in charge of the macro and the other one in charge of team fights and playing around your power spikes, I think is a big one.
Cascon from TGG, the good guys, asking, how much time do you put in a week to prep certain rotations and look at other teams to see why what they did work?
I mean, I think that's right. So I've been a shot call for about like 3 years. So throughout different phases, I've put different time allowances towards it. When I first started to learn to shot call, I think the majority of my shot calling improvements was spent studying others, right? And studying why people do things. Because it doesn't matter what people do, it's why they do it. That's what you need to understand as a shot caller. Because that's the only way you're going to learn and be able to like apply that to your own team. Because if you're just 4-1 rotating on Tomb because everyone else 4-1 rotates, you miss the whole point, right? You need to understand the reason you 4-1 rotate on Tomb of the Spider Queen is because that gives you control over the turn in, as well as like gives you map pressure because you're able to push in 2 lanes, get 2 gems, allows you to go get mercenary camps. Like that's what you need to understand more than like, okay, this is the 4-1, right? So I think spending a lot of time, I don't really have specific hours because it really has varied throughout my career. Like something my team this last week we've been doing is basically we'll do 3 hours of scrims and then like 2.5, 3 hours of VOD review. Just like we review every single game.
Finally.
And I've been loving it. Yeah, no, I think it's great. I think because like we all play a bunch of Hero League, so it's like why are we just jamming the game? Like I think there's a lot, and we've seen a lot of success. Like this has been a really good week for us, whereas last week we were really struggling, right? And I think that's something where going back to vocabulary, like we talk about those situations all the time and we're learning and growing and our synergy is getting better. And that's something as a shot caller, like you're gonna have to do that individually of like, okay, what's the right call? What's the right rotation? Why? Like in what situations should I do this? So much of it is VOD review and figuring that out. And maybe you should scrim less and VOD review more with your team to improve your shot calling. So I know that was a roundabout answer and I didn't give you like a specific number, but if you're first learning out how to shot call, you need to study a lot. If you've gotten pretty good at it, you can, just study when people do new things and you can ask yourself why. That's my short answer.
Follow-up question actually, again from Cascon. Do you ever use priority speaker option on TeamSpeak?
No, I just have a loud voice. I don't know. I know.
For those of you who don't know, there is an option for a lot of voice communication software where you can put one person on priority, and if they're speaking, it sort of dulls everyone else down and makes that person's voice come through easier.
If you have a group shot calling, maybe it would work. I've never used it, but I don't like the concept of like doling other people because in team fights, your shot caller is not necessarily the most important person to talk, right? Your tank probably is, or your support because you need to know your healing cooldowns. So I feel like turning your shot caller up and everyone else maybe down a little bit. And then in team fights, everyone's going to get louder. That's a little bit of a better solution. But yeah, if you're definitely having troubles like hearing your shot caller, maybe tell them to speak up or increase their volume, I think is a better solution than that.
Stoutfinger is asking, how does calling work in a team where the solo laner is the caller, like in Dignitas or Liquid? Do they have a secondary caller in the 4-man for the rotations? We talked about this, but
they do. Yeah, generally you'll have one person that's kind of leading that engage. Because one of the hardest things as a shot caller in the solo lane is you don't know why things didn't work, right? In your brain, this should work. This should be a good call. And then your team goes and dies. And you're like, why did that happen? I have no freaking idea, right? So having someone else that's kind of in charge of the 4-man and sees everything, right? Because you don't see all the little cooldowns that are thrown out because you're playing your hero in the top lane. It's a better solution to have one person just kind of be in charge and do that. But you can still help, right? Like you still see, why are their sieges up on Dragonshire at 1 minute and 20 seconds? Why haven't you done the sieges yet? Like you can say like, do siege. Like you're allowed to say stuff, but generally having one person in charge, I think is better.
Next question, Hiderino, also one of our mods. How does shot calling in HGC differs from the top teams compared to the lower tier teams? We also talked about this, but kind of a quick answer if you will.
I mean, I don't. Cav, you can if you want.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a really hard question because you're not necessarily on comms with different teams.
Yeah.
I've talked to different people about shot calling and how they do it, and I think really in a lot of cases it doesn't come down to differences in shot calling between shot callers. It comes down to how much the team listens. So,
well, I also think it's individuals too. I think it's how much individuals just know what to do.
Yeah,
that was gonna be my answers. Shot calling is important, yes, but also just having individual players that already know what they should be doing. Like I think that's just huge, right? And that comes into more the group style shot calling versus like a micromanager shot caller. But having people just knowing what they should do, I think, is why the best teams are the best.
All right.
And it's important to emphasize that the less you have to shot call because your team's already doing what you want them to do, the more airspace exists for calling different things. Or
to be creative
things. Yeah. So it's really important that everyone has the basics down to the point where they don't need to be shot called, and then you can only call the differences from the plan, and that's just a huge advantage.
Next question from JBeer, and I think this is a bit more towards the Michael specifically. Do you split the macro and micro shot calling? If yes, who gets priority when things heat up?
Whoever thinks they're more right. I don't know. When it sounds funny, but it is kind of true of like, you'll have this little dialogue back and forth of like, do knights, and they'll be like, wait, but we can get a pick here, and it's like, no, do knights, and then everyone comes. You know what I'm saying? Where it's like, and that's not always me, right? That's whoever the person is, right? So I think that is kind of the thing of like whoever's more sure, because like sometimes you call things so you just like maybe see opportunities in plays, right? But like, yeah, I don't know. That's a hard one to answer. The like, how do you difference between what's good? Because it's so relative depending on like what's your power spike. I don't know, Cav, you want to answer? Because I'm really struggling to answer this question.
So it's this question is, so the disagreement would come from the micro shot caller being like, that's not our win condition. We're not high up enough to do that. I think macro is honestly more important than micro. So I think the macro shot caller should have veto if he genuinely thinks that like there's some better thing to play for later on the map. But it's going to come down to individual teams who takes priority. And at some point, people have to realize that something's already happened. For instance, if Murden's already jumped in, that fight's happening, if you want it to or not. And you have to be like aware of the situation and just go for it. And I know for a fact that Blossom, for instance, right now is struggling with this because Hong Kono will constantly take fights as tank, and the rest of the team's just like, we're fighting now. We didn't want to do this. We're doing it. And it's a struggle for them as a team. So everything that happens in your amateur team, guys, it still happens at the pro level. It's people are people all the way up. They just get better at the game.
So next one change from Quill, Baguette Free. Is it the role of the support to call back in a team fight?
No.
That's a good answer.
It's on every player. I mean, it's like whoever sees it, right? Because every team fight is kind of different. I think it's whoever sees it. And just like, if you know it's a bad team fight, no matter who you are, no matter what role you're on, you should call that. And your team should listen, because there should be like a difference in the way that you say things, you know? Because like you'll call things you're not 100% sure about, and you'll call things where this is wrong, we need to leave, right? And everyone leaves, right? So it's like having that difference, I think, is important.
I always encourage people to call, especially when they're starting out, like call, I can't go. Like I'm already lit. I'm already chunked. Whatever word you guys end up wanting. And then the shot caller may be like, oh, well, our damage is not going to be here. We should probably leave the fight. Like you can kind of leave the call up to other people sometimes. But that's not anyone's job. If the fight's gone sideways, like everyone needs to call that they can't go in, and then someone needs to call just like leave. And in a lot of cases, it doesn't matter who it is.
The last question from Heroes Lounge, a bit slightly off topic, not quite into shot calling, but I think an interesting one and kind of works for you, Michael. What are good ways to adapt when changing to a new team, new role in your own team?
I mean, first thing I would say is you need to role change if you want to. I think it's a very unhealthy thing to change roles because others want to, because then down the road, like let's say things are going bad, which things are going to go bad because the nature of being a pro is it's up and down. You're going to resent your teammates, and you're going to resent the fact that you had to swap roles, and you hate your new role and you don't want to play it. And this isn't, I really like support, for the record. This isn't me saying this is how I feel, because I very much enjoyed playing support and competitive, but it's something where you need to want to do it versus like you feel forced to do it. I feel like that's a big thing about role swaps. And then also I think just anytime you're learning a new role, you need to be pretty vocal with your team of like, let me know what I can do better, right? And be like super receptive of like, I just swap roles. You don't have to be a mean person about like telling me when I messed up, but like I know I'm new to the role, like just point out little things you think I can improve on after the game, and like that way I can focus on it. And also studying the best players in the world to play your role. Like if you're role swapping and you're not studying the best players to play your role, like I'm a little confused, right? Because you just swapped into a very hard role. You should instantly be looking at like, okay, who are the best players and why do they play that way? Look at someone like Zalia, right? Like he role swapped onto support and he's a beast at it. Like watch what he does and try and understand it, right? That's something that's, I mean, I also think watching pro streamers that play your role that you're swapping into and asking them questions of like, hey, why do you do this? Or like, what should I be looking at as a warrior? I just swapped to being a warrior main. What are the biggest like 3 tips you can give me? Most streamers love like talking to you and giving you advice and like giving you some insight. So I think that's a really good thing that could also help you. It's not all on you. Like you can go to others and ask for help.
Zalia is a really good example of that. Dig was really happy with how they did at Gold Club World Championship. And, people were saying, yeah, he played really well in Lucio. He sports. That's fine. He just swapped the role. We're okay with that. And then, they had reasonable expectations. So I think that's a good thing for everyone on a team to have coming in. It's just reasonable expectations of everyone's performance, particularly if it's a role swap or some other situation.
Well, we're done with the Heroes Long questions. So Cav, now your Discord. You do the honors.
From the Nexus Schoolhouse, from Zwix. After you've made a mistake, a bad call that results in multiple deaths or throwing some advantage away, how do you get your team to focus on what to do next instead of debating what was the better call? We addressed this a little bit earlier. But
Nice try.
Yeah, I think that we answered that already.
Nice try, and then you just focus on the next thing. That's the quick answer. Yeah.
This is actually a good question. Cascon, how does tilt affect your calls, and can the team tell you're tilted? Do you make calls every 10 seconds or so, or is it something you're always doing, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean that's a hard thing. People can tell when you're tilted, definitely. And then they instantly start to like not trust you as much, which is fair, right? Because you're tilted. But
Yeah, it affects their
um,
confidence in your calls, and that's
yeah,
like,
they're
we talked about that already. It's the number one thing. People have to have confidence in your calls. It doesn't matter how good they are.
I generally feel like being blunt is a pretty big thing. Of like, I mean, it depends why you're tilted. If you're like, I hate this player on my team, that's why I'm tilted. Don't be blunt, right? Because like that's not gonna do anything but like piss everyone off. Like, but like, hey, I have a cough, I'm sick, which is how I am right now. Like, I might be a little less vocal today. Like, I would appreciate if you guys could help step it up. I think just being upfront about that will help everyone, right? Because then they, I feel like part of where the tilt comes into such this spiral is everyone's sitting there wondering why is he tilted, right? Like, did I do something to piss that person off? Like, what's happening? Like, can we change it? And I feel like our brains kind of wander and it becomes this worst case scenario of like, okay, I've been teammates with Michael for 2 years, but he hates me now because he's just tilted for the last like hour. You know what I'm saying? Where it's like,
It's really
that's not
weird.
true.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's like this spiral where it's like you just assume the worst and just being like, hey, this is why I'm tilted. And, being like, hey, I made a bad play. And like, I generally think not blaming on others is a really good thing as well. Like, even if you are kind of tilted about someone else, just being like, I'm just a little frustrated with like how I'm playing today, like something like that. And then being like, sorry, I'll try and be better. I think will just like help ease everyone's atmosphere. Personally, I generally think that's a pretty good thing to do. But yeah, definitely you get tilted sometimes. And like, I feel like that's a big part of being a pro is you need to learn how to navigate that.
And a big thing I think is your personal life, even as amateur players, the personal life can take it out of you. If like you had a death in the family, you had a breakup, you should communicate that to your team. You don't necessarily have to be personal. Just be like, I had something really bad happen to me, and it's going to affect my play. I'm sorry, guys, but like you can if you're up to playing, hopefully they're understanding and sympathetic.
Mm-hmm. Well, and generally they'll try and lift you up instead of like, what the hell is going on? Like, why is he not playing that way? Right.
Exactly. And that's
something, yeah.
I think that's the big thing is it's a team. You're not like, they're not going to be mad at you because you're not perfect. And you would do the same for them because that's what teams do. Lexa, how much do people disagree with your calls?
And
like how frequently do your calls get disagreed in like scrims, and how do you deal with that situation? We kind of address this a lot, but the frequency is an interesting question.
Depends on the team, depends on the players. I feel like the team where Cav coach was guessing, or Cav guest was coaching me with like Cav, K1, Fan, Akka, myself, I think there was a lot of disagreements, right? Because I feel like there were a lot of different ideologies on how to play, and I feel like we also didn't necessarily have a lot of respect in each other, and I think I didn't have that much confidence in my shot calling, and I think part of that was I already had that, and I think part of that is that like I felt like the rest of the team didn't really have confidence in me. Which makes it hard to shot call. So like in those situations, like that team specifically, I feel like I had a lot more disagreements where I feel like past most other teams, it's a very rare thing.
Yeah.
I mean, because generally when I'm pretty confident, I feel like I'm one of the better shot callers there are, especially in North America. So.
And it's never easy, like dealing with people in situations, high pressure situations, because anytime you're trying to try hard and competitive, like it's a high pressure situation, regardless of the level you're doing it, it's never going to be easy. So it's a skill that you can develop over time. And some teams it's going to be harder than others. I think is a fair way to put it. A lot of questions from Holly Myung. Mm-hmm. Is shot calling about giving guidelines on what to do or more specific instructions? Example, takes easies versus X and Y, goes to take easies, rest, soak. So we kind of addressed this a little bit. I don't know if you want to give a short answer.
Yeah, I feel like we kind of already talked about it earlier.
Yeah. We also answered this one. Actually. We've been really thorough, guys. I don't know what to.
I talk a lot.
I know. I know that looking at camp timings and knowing when heroics are up or down are key for shot calling. Any of the things you'd say are fun. We actually covered like most of these questions. Mm-hmm. This is a good one actually. What's your advice for developing good team comms?
From Ezelin.
This is a really hard question because pros are still working on developing good team comms, like across the board, all teams across all regions. Team comms are hard.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing is like, that's when people ask me like what makes the teams the best, my answer is always communication and basically just having individuals know what to do from a macro sense. I think those are the Like you look at Dignitas and you look at Gen G, and I think like that's what makes them so much better than everyone else is all their players know what they're doing and all their players have really good communication, right? So I think a way to develop communication, kind of like what I alluded to earlier, is having your team watch a lot more replays together. But I feel like more and more watching replays and talking about how you want to do things is much better, because then you make a dialogue as a team and a vocabulary as a team, which I think has a lot of value, right? So watching replays and basically like that slow siege example that I used earlier, I think that's a really good thing that you can do with a lot of things, right? Because I think communication is kind of everything. I think something that's really hard is when one player doesn't talk or doesn't talk very much. That's something that I struggled a lot with. You know, Akaface, we were teammates for about 2.5, like pretty much my whole career. He's never been a vocal individual, right? And the reason he gave is that he plays better when he doesn't talk. And it's like, how do I argue with that, right? Like that is a very hard thing to disagree with. And he did progressively get better at it, right? Not to the level that we wanted, but like he has gotten better throughout his career. So that's something where kind of trying to navigate that, you know, is difficult because like you need your players communicating. And I don't have an answer for you of like the solution because I'm still trying to figure it out, right? That's something that I think all pro teams are trying to figure out. But I think being respectful in the way that you bring things up and being an open environment where everyone can voice their thoughts without being villainized or like everyone ganging up on them, I think is the best way to improve in general. So I would assume that those would carry over into getting better at communication as well.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I have two good pieces of advice. One is record your comms so that you actually know what people said or didn't say. Because a lot of arguments start about what got said and someone didn't hear it, or maybe it actually didn't get said and you just thought you said it, which is also a problem. And go into replays, as Michael said. But when you go into replays, think about specifically working on comms. Like, find ways to work on just comms. Don't try to work on everything at once. When you're actually playing the game, you should be working. You know, you're playing Hero League, you should be grinding mechanics. When you're playing grinding scrims, you should be working on communication and coordination. When you're doing replay review, you should be working on developing a vocabulary and communication with your team. Try to break everything out. And I have a good example of this. The first game that old Roll20 played, they weren't Roll20 at the time. Team 8 was what they were called. Their first game together as a team was versus AI. That was their warm up for a match for getting into open. And literally all they did was go into an AI and practice comms so that they could be on the same page. That's all they did. So there's a lot of different ways you can kind of figure out to practice. ARAMs are actually a good way to practice comms as a team because you don't have to think about all the macro stuff. You're literally just like, there's an enemy team. What are we doing? So there's things you can do. Try to find creative solutions to work on just comms without having to focus on a bunch of other stuff at the same time.
What about it was not asked, just my question. What about bonding? Just, you know, get friendly together, try to spend more time, maybe even outside the game if possible.
I'm terrible at this, but I think Michael actually has a lot of good insights on it.
I think it's really important. I mean, I don't know. Is
it gonna help you with the communication?
Yeah, 100%. It helps.
Yeah,
I think it helps like becoming friends, right? I think something that actually has helped my Endemic team is like we played Fortnite a lot together as a team, right? Which is fun and playful, but it's also like you carry over Verbage, right? Of like, you know, like the games aren't the same at all, but like, you know, we'd have fun and joke around. So I feel like it helps. I don't know how much it actually helps communication, but it helps the atmosphere, right? Team atmosphere is very, very important. And the way you improve is to have like a healthy atmosphere that everyone feels safe to like voice their honest thoughts of like, this is an issue, we need to improve this. And everyone like focuses on it and tries to improve. And I think bonding or playing other games or doing things as a team outside of just working will help you improve that most definitely. I think team bonding is really, really important and making sure you have a good atmosphere.
When do you make the initial judgment about whether to the next objective or not? And how is that communicated to the team?
I feel like it's pretty soon after you finish the first objective. I mean, it depends. If we're talking about like curses on like Cursed Hollow. Okay, so there are like two different times, right? So I would say shot calling post winning a team fight is not very preemptive, right? In the sense of like, sometimes it's like, okay, if we win this team fight, let's do this. But most of the time it's like you win the team fight and then you make like a snap decision of this is what you want to do. And even as a shot caller, you might be thinking about it beforehand of like, all right, what's our win condition? All right, opening up bot, keep on dragon char is our win condition. Okay, if we win a team fight, we are taking bottom mercs and pushing bot because that's our win condition, right? So it's preemptive in your head, but you don't voice that, right? So it's like when you win a team fight, you call that out. But things like Curse Hollow, for example, or Sky Temple, where the objective is, I would say, more choreographed, where it's like, okay, this is where the next temple phase or this is the next curse phase. I feel like after the first objective, you kind of have a little bit of downtime, right? Where everyone kind of goes back to soaking lanes, you do mercenary camps, and you're kind of setting up and manipulating the map for the way that you want to play the next objective phase. So that I would say is very thought out, or it should be, of like, this is what we want to do.
That's a good answer. How does the previous decision to contest the next objective or not change how you manipulate your team around the map before the objective starts on? And I think he kind of answered this. He doesn't start right before. He manipulates his team like as the next previous objective ends in most cases, right?
Yeah. I mean, at least I think that's depends on the map, right? But I think that's what you should be doing on most maps.
Well, I think we went over this in the experience episode and go back and look at it, but there are experience intervals you can depend on. So you're going to know what level you're going to be and what level the enemy team is going to be, assuming standard play as soon as the previous objective ends. So you're going to know where you're at and you can make decisions based on that.
Mm-hmm.
Is reasoning ever given for calls? Do X because we're going to do Y, or are calls just made with minimal context? Just push X, do X because I said so.
I generally feel like there's reasoning. Again, it depends on the team and the atmosphere, but generally push bot forward top, you know, like you trade situations, I feel like happen pretty often, like, oh, they're all top, push, you know, like stuff like that. Because you don't necessarily expect it. There definitely are calls where you just don't tell them why and you just do it. Because exactly of like, we'll go back to that slow siege example. You don't have time to explain why you're slow sieging. It would take like a lot of like
unnecessary effort.
It should be explained beforehand or after the game. It should not be explained in the game, right? But there are situations where you do explain it, of like, take the sieges, hold the cap for when trib spawns. You know, like that's, I mean, I guess that's not explaining, that's just telling, right? Because explaining would be so that they can push during the objective, right? I feel like a lot of the information is something your team should know beforehand, right? Like they should know why you're doing mercenary camps. They should know why you're doing things. And if they don't, they should ask and you should explain, because that's important.
Absolutely. And for me, this goes back to level of play. I don't think competitive teams have those gaps in knowledge about why a call might be made. It's kind of obvious to them. But there's a quote, I forget the general's name, but it's a famous quote. It's don't give orders about how you want things done. Give orders about what you want done and let people surprise you. So, and I think that definitely applies to shotcalling. If you tell people what your goals are, especially at a competitive level, they're going to figure out how to get you there.
Yeah.
And it gives them more room to optimize their decision making in a context.
Yeah.
How much input do other team members calls ever discussed in game, or only upon?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the team and the players. Like I feel like, so Dansky and I dual shot call, right? So a lot of stuff is just like a banter and a discussion between him and I of like, dude, what do you think about this creative crazy call? And he's like, no, that's insane. Or dude, let's do it, rip it, you know, or vice versa. Or, you know, Kira call a lot of stuff. So generally I feel like there's a lot of dialogue going back and forth. But again, I feel like a lot of it's 30 seconds or 45 seconds before the objective, right? So you have this buffer time of discuss and figure things out, where it's not like this last second, like, the objective spawning, what do we do? And everyone's just like, there's fire, you know, like, it's generally like way beforehand is when the discussion's happening and people already kind of know what they should be doing. So I feel like you should generally have the plan, but you discuss the creative ideas.
This is kind of an interesting question because I don't know how much of it applies, but it definitely applies to the amateur team a lot. How often are things blamed on the draft that you think were a shot calling or general approach to the game issue? And how are you able to figure out the difference?
That's so hard. I mean, that
is a really hard question.
That question right there is a big, like, pro players and pro teams deal with that every single day, every single draft. It is how much of it comes down to draft and how much of it comes down to play. And I think one of the most difficult things that I've tried to learn and, you know, and just evolve from is there are so many variables when you're a pro player. After every single game, there were thousands of, individual decisions that each individual player made that, affected the outcome of that game, right? And you need to take everything with a grain of salt that, yes, your draft might be bad, and they're both issues. Does that make sense? And you decide which one you need to focus on, because your draft might be bad, but your shot calling might also be bad. Or your draft was really good and your shot calling was bad. Or let's say your draft was bad, but your shot calling was really good and you 4-leveled them, right? It's hard to know what is the issue. So that's something where I think that's more of a mentality thing of the way you look at your losses and your wins, of what did we do wrong and what did we do right, versus I think the draft's bad here. Because the one thing I really hate is when you don't give solutions of, the draft was bad. What should we have changed? I don't know, but the draft was bad. I think that is just not very good communication. You should be able to pinpoint what you thought was maybe not good, because you don't necessarily know, and we don't know until we watch the replay, but hey, maybe I think this was bad and maybe trying this would have been better, right? And it just feels a lot more productive, and it makes it feel less like you're blaming the drafter and more like you want to improve. I guess that would be my good advice, because that question you're asking is really something that every single pro player deals with every single day, multiple times. So yeah.
I think just having a growth mindset in general, always trying to take experiences and learn from them, and figuring out what went wrong can be really difficult. There's no hard and fast solution to that. It comes down a lot to game knowledge. I would say if you're really stuck, try to get an external perspective. Maybe talk to someone on their team that you're friends with and have them review the replay with you. If they're not involved, maybe that'll help. That's what coaches should be doing, I think. That's a big part of what coaching should do for teams, and I'm still really sad that not every pro team has a coach. You're down to 2 questions. You ready?
Yeah.
How much should a shot caller be managing Ghost Dunk?
Can you repeat it? It kind of cut out.
How much should a shot caller be managing the off?
The off lane?
Yeah.
My boy Ghost Dunk. Hope you're doing well, dude. I don't think the shot caller should really be managing the off laner, unless it's a situation like Towers of Doom, and it's 50 seconds into the game. Hey, solo laner, you should push out your lane and rotate mid because they have a Dahaka. And if you don't do that, they're going to global invade our camp. I think that is a situation where it's okay for the shot caller to micromanage and say, this is what we want. We want to do our camp. And the way we can do that is if our solo laner is in the middle lane. I don't think they should be telling them when to global it's mixed. I have mixed emotions on that. I do think if your tri-lane's bottom and you have a Dahaka and you see the enemy opponent stepping up, you should say global, but that's not necessarily a shot calling decision. I think that's an individual decision. I generally feel like the off laner should be on an island and they should be making the right, their own plays in their own brain, just because the shot caller can't really focus and see stuff like that. But I do think it's okay to sometimes ask questions of can you get top shrine for D-Shire, or can you rotate down? I think those are better questions than rotate down, because you don't know necessarily what's happening.
And it's not struggling, but I think if the foreman has good comms, you're going to end up in situations where the offlane knows what's going on. It's I'm checking siege is something the tank might say. And they're on siege. And he asks, can we invade? And then the offlane might be I'm going into fog, right? So he can global in. They don't know if he's globaling in or not. They just know that he's not in vision anymore. Yeah. If your foreman has good comms, you won't have to shot call the offlaner really very much, because they're going to know what their priorities are and they can communicate them to you. This is actually a really interesting question. We went over it a little bit, but it's cool. So it's your last one. How should a shot caller approach a team fight that you know is about to happen? E.g., you called the team fight that's going to happen. The objective's up. You're all there. You know you want to fight. What happens? What's the shot caller's job at that point? And how do you make sure the team's on the same page?
So, that's kind of ever changing. I feel like that's a discussion. So what you're alluding to is basically shot calling a team fight. Yeah. And I definitely think that's something that happens and something you should talk about, right? So Verbage for my team, we use the term front to back a lot. And we're playing this team fight front to back. What does that mean to you two? So front to back for our team basically means we're hitting their tanks, we're peeling back, we're playing around our Rainer, we're playing around our Hammer, we're playing around our Phoenix. We're just kiting, right? We're playing around our damage dealers because we have a higher sustained damage than they do, right? And then we have dive, right? So if we're diving, we generally pick a target. This is our priority target in team fights.
and that's generally a discussion we'll have beforehand. So kind of calling out the primary target, and what I mean by primary target is that doesn't mean balls to the wall, we're all suiciding to kill that person. That means if this person's out of position, they should be focused with damage. They are the number one priority. If you can get damage on this hero, that's who we want to get damage on, right? Don't die for it. Never die for it. But if you can get it, that's what we want. So generally, that's a discussion that you want to have throughout the game. If you're about to have it right leading into a team fight, that's awesome. Generally, I feel like team fights just kind of, they're not that linear, right? They're much more like chaotic. So yeah. But yeah, in that situation, I would kind of just reiterate, this is how we win team fights. This is our win condition. This is our power spike. Play around our level 20 Nazebo because he will carry, something like that, I think is pretty good. Or like, watch out for mosh pit. Like I feel like pointing out major ult cooldowns of the opponents is really big. Like let's say that example that Cav gave about Diablo Hanzo. The next team fight, we said spread out, because if we get Hanzo Arrow into APOC, we're going to get absolutely destroyed, things like that. And you don't need to say the last part of we're going to get destroyed. Just say spread out for Diablo APOC and Hanzo Arrow. I think that's kind of good.
Spread for Mosh is a very common thing to hear on comms, like constantly, or don't chase too hard, or don't get baited by EDC backing up, stuff like that. And you sort of have a plan. When you have a comp, you have a plan to how you want to team fight. And the question is just like, in the situation, how do we prioritize this? Do we prioritize that? Oh, this guy's in trouble. We need to use that. Oh, I burned my cooldown, so maybe we need to kite back for a second. I like that front to back. I like that a lot, though, because it is so hard to get to good. Like in competitive, you can never get to a backliner. Like they have to make a mistake almost, just a step up too far. You have to get a vision flank.
Yeah, or like a
something.
Flank, yeah.
So there's a reason that tanks die first in a lot of professional games in team fights, because you can't get anyone else, so you have to kill the tank. In an ideal world, I think you would always kill the main damage dealer
or the healer,
and then like the sub damage dealer, the bruiser, and the tank. In that
order.
You're never gonna get that. And that was the last question. You made it despite the cough.
I know, I'm happy. It was fun. I always like discussing shot calling. Thank you guys so much for having me on the show. I really enjoyed it.
Heartless said he wanted to do a shot calling episode, and I actually couldn't think of anyone better, honestly. When I was coaching, I was so impressed with shot calling, and I wanted to have some of that insight that you have and share it with everyone, because it's such a big thing to have pros sharing that kind of insight with the community, making everyone a little bit better at the game.
I appreciate that. I really do.
Cav always mentions two shot callers in the game. It's Wubby and it's you.
Wubby. Oh.
And you.
I don't know if I'm as good as Wubby, but I'll take it. Yeah, thank you. No, I thank you for the kind words. It means a lot, Cav. I appreciate that. I enjoyed our time working together. I really did. Sad it didn't go out better, but I don't think that necessarily was. Everyone's at fault, right? But I think it was more of a difficult circumstance versus us.
I mean, it was the org, I think, more than anything.
Yeah,
it's just unfortunate. But anyway, thank you for coming on the show, and I'll let Heartless sign us out. But thank you all for watching. Thank you all for listening. I hope you guys learned something.
Michael, thank you so much for joining us for this fairly long episode. It's been an honor. I know at least I'm speaking on behalf of Heroes Lounge, and we are all very grateful for making the time to join us here and help our viewers, help our community be a little bit better at Heroes of the Storm. Is there anything you want to say to the viewers before we log off?
I hope you guys enjoy it. If you do and you want to learn more about shot calling, feel free to tune into my stream, twitch.tv/Michael Udall. I stream pretty much every single day, and you can, come ask me questions in person. So, and thank you guys again for having me on the show. I really appreciate it. I had a lot of fun. I always love talking about shot calling. It's a big part of my life. So thank you.
Cav, as always, it's been a pleasure. Something for the viewers?
You guys can watch me at twitch.tv/CavalierGuest if you want to do so. I do a show every Wednesday called the HGC Rundown, where I go over every region's HGC games for the previous week. Usually it lasts about 3 or 4 hours. It's pretty detailed. Go over meta considerations, lots of little things, and do some other content for Heroes of the Storm as well. And it's just a fun channel. It's very educational. It's that is why I'm on Educational Lounge, because I just love talking about the game and making people better.
Guys, girls, sloths, and other animals alike, if you enjoyed this, Michael, you need to learn about the sloths in our community.
Sloths.
Oh yeah.
Sloths are the official mascot.
Yeah.
Sloths are amazing. Sloths are life.
Yeah. Okay.
the very least, join our Discord and check our various sloth emotes. I assure you, you're gonna enjoy every single one of them.
I will spam some sloths. Invite me. I'll join.
The sloth emotes are
Oh,
actually
it'd be an
so
honor. I mean, it is high quality sloth emotes. You can't argue otherwise. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this special episode with our special guest, Michael Udall from Endemic eSports. And as always, I'll see you guys next time. Hope you enjoy this. Have a good night.